Could atheism entail a contradiction? Welcome to Worldview Design. In this video, we will explore Joshua Rasmussen's article about the logical implications of atheism. The goal of the article is not to show conclusively what atheism must entail, but to bring to light a conceptual terrain that could serve all truth seekers from all perspectives. Most philosophers take for granted that atheism is at least logically possible. But in this video, I want to show you two arguments that challenge that assumption, not with rhetoric or mystery, but through precise reasoning. If either of these arguments work, then God's existence isn't just actually necessary. It's logically necessary, on par with the truths of mathematics and logic themselves. Let's take our time and walk this through. Whether you're skeptical or theistic, I invite you to explore with me. So let's begin with the background. In philosophy of religion, many arguments for God's existence are a posteriori. That is, they're based on observations or experiences that go beyond mere reason, such as arguments from the apparent design in the universe, moral awareness, or the origin of the cosmos. These arguments start with what we experience and try to reason toward the unseen. But there's another tradition, a priori arguments. These don't depend on observation. They rely instead on logic, reason, and analysis. The classic example is the ontological argument, the idea that the very concept of a perfect being implies that such a being must exist. Now, here's the twist. Most people, philosophers included, aren't convinced by the ontological argument. As a result, they tend to assume that atheism is logically consistent. Maybe it's false, they'll say, but it's at least possible. But what if we've overlooked something? What if there's another route to show that any proposition that precludes God's existence actually collapses into contradiction? To explore this, let's be clear on terms. When I say atheism, I mean the claim that no God exists. Not just that there's no all-loving deity, but no necessary mind at all. That's going to be important. I define a God for this argument as a mind that exists necessarily. Now, what does it mean to say something entails a contradiction? Here's a simple example. Suppose I say that 7 plus 5 equals 15. That doesn't look like a contradiction, but once you apply some definitions, you realize, wait, that can't be true. Because 7 plus 5 equals 12, and 12 does not equal 15. So if we assume that 7 plus 5 equals 15 and apply basic truths of math, we end up with a contradiction. That's what I mean by entailment. We deduce a contradiction by reason alone. So now we ask, could something similar happen with atheism? Could we start with the proposition there is no God, and using truths of logic and reason, arrive at a contradiction? That's the question, and it might be less straightforward than you think. Let's first challenge a key assumption. Richard Swinburne, a respected philosopher of religion, has argued that you can't deduce a contradiction just from saying something doesn't exist, whether that something is a unicorn, a triangle, or even God. But I think there's a problem with this assumption. Here's why. Let's try it. Suppose someone says there is no truth. Not just that we don't know the truth, but that no truth exists at all. Now pause. If that claim is correct, if it is true that there is no truth, then there is in fact at least one truth, the truth that there is no truth. You see the problem? The claim undermines itself. It affirms the very thing it denies, so denying the existence of truth actually leads us into a contradiction. Now, what's the point? The point is this: if some denials lead to contradiction, then we can't just assume atheism is safe. We have to investigate carefully. Now let's get into the first main argument. This is called the conceptualist argument. It connects truth to mind. Here's how it goes. Suppose there is no God, no necessary mind. Then it is true that there is no God, so we have at least one truth. But here's the thing. Truths need truth-bearers, things that are true. And truth-bearers on this view depend on minds. Let's pause here. Think of a proposition like 2 plus 2 equals 4. Where does that truth live? A conceptualist would say it lives in the mind as a content of thought. If there were no minds at all, there would be no truths. But if we've just said there is no God, and that's true, then at least one truth exists. That implies that some mind must exist to host that truth, including a necessary mind to host necessary truths. And that's the contradiction. We began by denying the existence of a necessary mind, but ended up affirming it. It's important to see that this argument operates entirely within the landscape of reason. No telescope required, just logic. Of course, not everyone accepts conceptualism. Some are Platonists. They think truths exist in an abstract, mind-independent realm. Others are nominalists. They think truths reduce to symbols or language. But if conceptualism is even possibly true, then atheism faces a serious challenge. The denial of a fundamental mind may end up denying the very foundation for truths, including the truth of atheism itself. Let's now explore the second major argument. This one builds on a more classical structure, a contingency argument. It starts again with the claim, there is no God. First, then, it is true that there is no God, so again we've got at least one truth, but truths imply existence. After all, something must exist in order for anything to be true, so something exists. Now we pivot from the fact that something exists, we ask why. Why does anything exist at all? This is where the contingency argument comes in. Everything we see, trees, stars, chairs, grass, is contingent. It didn't have to exist, so if something exists, there must be a foundation that can't not exist, a necessary being or necessary reality. Let's call it N. Now, what is N like? Here's a key idea. If N lacked a mind, then it would likely have some arbitrary, unexplained limits in its causal power, since it could not form its own thoughts. But limits cry out for explanation. Why this much power and not more? The simplest explanation of limits is ultimately in terms of some maximal, unlimited reality, implying that N is maximal in its fundamental nature. And a maximal reality, arguably, must include a necessary mind, because such a mind would fill out its maximal nature and powers. So we're back again to a necessary mind. Once more, if something exists, and we follow reason's trail, we're led not just to some foundation, but one with the traits of a God. And that contradicts our starting point that there is no God. Now I want to slow down and reflect on what this means. If either of these arguments works, if denying God's existence leads to contradiction, then theism is logically necessary. That's stronger than mere factual necessity. It puts God's existence on par with the truths of logic and arithmetic. It also has profound implications for philosophy of logic. If God exists necessarily, then perhaps even the laws of logic themselves are grounded in God. They live in the mind of God. Now, you don't have to accept that, but it's a striking picture. God not only as the foundation of being, but as the foundation of reason itself. Before we wrap up, I want to share something personal. I didn't always believe that God's existence is logically necessary. In fact, I assumed, like many philosophers, that logic alone is insufficient to entail the existence of any concrete reality, let alone God's existence. But as I continued thinking through these arguments, especially the two-stage contingency argument, I found my views changing. Gradually, the light of reason illuminated new paths, and I became convinced of at least this. If God exists, then God's existence is as sturdy and robust as logic itself. That shift didn't happen overnight, but it happened through continual reflection. So what do you think? Have these arguments expanded any of your views? Do you think truths require minds? Do you find the idea of a necessary foundation compelling? I'd love to hear from you. Let's continue the conversation. For Rasmussen's full article, click on the link in the description below. May the light of reason guide you into a deeper understanding of all things.